Okay, so this news is actually very interesting. It's very fresh again. I think it was published today, September 12th. Unity introducing a new fee attached to game installs. So this is very new. In the past, Unity was having some fees for developers once you reached a certain amount of revenue. I think it was something like 100K, and at that point you were supposed to pay some fees. Lots of people are having interesting questions, and not everything is very clear on exactly how it's going to work, especially because it's now attached to installs, which is so the cost of Unity games as a game engine is once again about to increase. Starting in January 2024, the company will begin charging what it's calling a Unity runtime fee that is based on a number of users installing games built on the widely used engine. The runtime fee will kick in after developers cross specific revenue and install thresholds that scale with different subscription plans. For those on Unity Personal or Unity Plus licenses, the fee will kick in after a project crosses both 200,000 in revenue over 12 months and 200,000 total installs. Okay, so this is very important. This is the important aspect. After you reach a certain amount of revenue, but also a total installs, you will have to pay per install. With that, you also have to have the licenses, and it's going to be different if you have the personal one or the plus one. Developers operating on the new Unity Pro or Unity Enterprise licenses will be granted a higher threshold before they begin owing fees. For those devs, the charge will kick in after a title earns 1 million over the same 12-month period and passes 1 million installs. According to a breakdown sent to Game Developer by Unity, fees will be charged on a monthly basis. This is important. Developers could run into trouble if this is a monthly basis, because it's possible that you arrive in a situation where you have a certain amount of installs, so you have to pay a certain amount, but you don't have the revenue yet for whatever reason. For example, you know that with Steam, you have 1 month delay between the payment and what you receive yourself. And with Game Pass and other stuff like that, it may be different. I don't know. So this can actually be a big problem. So according to a breakdown, monthly basis, Unity Personal and Plus developers will pay a flat fee of 20 cents per install. Okay, so then it goes into the details of how much you're going to pay and stuff. This is not really interesting. So because it's super complicated, you now need to have a table like that. I find it very funny in a way. You have this table and you have to know, okay, where am I on the license? Do I have the personal or plus or the pro or the enterprise? And then what is my revenue, my install threshold? And then depending on all of those things, depending on the number of installs, how much do I have to pay per install? So 20 cents or 15 cents or whatever. It's also being said that this is going to be scaled depending on the country. So for example, in what is called developing countries, for example, India. So you know that with Steam, for example, the price of your game is set up differently depending on the country to reflect the cost of living and how much money people can actually pay for something. In a similar manner, this will be scaled. So for example, you won't pay 20 cents per install if it's an Indian install. But this is also adding to the complexity. So the article goes into much more detail about that, and it's interesting to read what is leading Unity for in that direction. But also some developers are reacting to that, and I invite you to read that the gamedeveloper.com article. I will link it in the description. We're going to take a look at some Twitter responses from developers, but in here there was a response from the Vampire Survivor developer. It's very interesting because it's a cheap game with lots of installs, so that might actually be a very impactful decision for the game. Like the first instinct is to say that it's not going to be that impactful because you have to have 200,000 in revenue and 200,000 in installs, which is quite a lot in a 12-month period, of course. So if you're like a small indie, it's probably not going to affect you. But if you are a bigger studio, it can actually impact you very much. And especially if you have a free-to-play game, actually pretty interesting. And this is something that we can see on Twitter. So Olivier here replied to the tweet from gamedeveloper. Beyond my knee-jerk shitposting reaction to this, I would like Unity to explain how it impacts pirated versions of the games, demos, and Game Pass / subscription deals. So this is very interesting. Pirated versions of the game. So how is Unity tracking the number of installs? Is it because they are installing something in the executable that you're creating, so some sort of tracker in a way that is going to send the data, which is probably going to require the internet? This is an interesting question. And how are they going to define that the install is actually a real install? What if it's a pirated version? Are you going to pay for a pirated version? This is an interesting question. Is it going to work for demos or not? So do you have something special to do to make sure that your game is not counting as an install if it's a demo? Because maybe your demo can be widely successful and you have lots and lots of installs, and now you have to pay for that. And of course, how does it work with Game Pass and subscriptions? Because the same thing can happen. You can have lots and lots of installs, but maybe you don't have revenue yet, or you don't have revenue at all. I don't know how those deals work, but for example, with Game Pass, I think that you have the money up front, but maybe in some cases you have the money on a monthly basis or after a certain amount of time or whatever. I don't know. The news is dropping like that, but we don't have a lot of answers. So I guess Unity developers are starting to freak out a bit, especially if they know that they're going to have a bigger success. And Kenny also replied something interesting, I think. He tweeted that also, which is interesting. Oh, I missed this, but Unity Plus is also being retired, meaning you'll have to choose with the free tier and show the Unity splash screen, or the much more expensive Unity Pro tier, which costs more than $1,000 per year, which is interesting also because it goes with this news. So it means that most people are probably going to have to pay more, which is very interesting. One of the most interesting questions, I believe, is how exactly is it tracking installs? For example, if you have a Steam account and you install the game twice on, for example, your Steam Deck and your desktop, is it going to count as 2 installs? We don't really know how those things are going to work. And I guess if you're a Unity developer, this can be a bit frightening, right? Because it means more money that you're not going to see. It's an expense now. It's not just, oh, we take a cut from your revenue. It's, we know that you have this many installs and you have to pay, which can be a bit frightening. As many of you knew, the Unity engine is in fact 2 substantial software components, the Unity editor and the Unity runtime. The Unity runtime is code that executes on player device and makes made with Unity games works at scale, with billions of monthly downloads. So this is really interesting the way they're putting that. I've never seen anyone talk about the game engine in that sense. They're saying that it's both a tool to make games, but also a tool to run games. I mean, of course, of course, just like Unreal, just like Godot, just like game makers, all of them are actually also running the code. I hope it's also running the code. What do you want? Do you want me to create something to run the code instead of the engine? This is very weird. It's a weird way of saying, hey, you have to pay for that service that has been there forever and that everyone is also providing. So we are introducing a Unity runtime fee that is based upon each time a qualifying game is downloaded by an end user. We choose this because each time a game is downloaded, the Unity runtime is also installed. Again, weird phrasing. Also, we believe that an initial install-based fee allows creator to keep the ongoing financial gains from player engagement, unlike a revenue share. Okay, this is an interesting phrase, I believe. Okay, So basically they're trying to turn the thing around and say, when we take a cut out of your revenue, if you're making financial gains from the player engagement, meaning that, for example, they buy DLCs, they buy cosmetics or stuff inside of your game, now we're taking a cut from that. So by just taking a cut when a game is installed, we're basically making sure that you are free from further revenue share with us. You don't have to pay us anything. The game is installed and then you don't pay us anything else. So it's a nice way of putting it. I don't know exactly what would be the difference. Maybe some games are actually going to make more money that way. You can think of maybe very popular free-to-play games. Maybe, of course, they have lots of installs, so they have to pay a certain amount of money now for those installs. But also, every time someone is buying something inside their game, they don't have to pay a dime to Unity. So maybe in some very specific situations, it's going to make more money for the developer. But usually, personally, when I see a company like that make a change on the monetization of their product, usually it's not for the benefit of the consumer. Usually, or the client. Usually, it's because it will make them more money. And my guess is that if Unity is doing that right now, it's because they think, and they probably are running the calculations on their end, and they're saying, okay, this is going to make more money, so let's do that instead. Let's do per install instead of a revenue share. So will this fee apply to games using Unity runtime that are already on the market on January 1st, 2024? Yes, the fee applies to eligible games currently in market that continue to distribute the runtime. For more details on when the fee may apply to your game, see the when does the Unity runtime fee take effect. So this is really interesting. They're doing that retroactively, which is also very weird. How are they counting the installs? Do they already have analytics on the installs? I guess not all games have analytics enabled. Are they going to ask you to supply the numbers yourself? Maybe going to Steam and Xbox and stuff, and you have to declare the numbers. How does that work legally, that you can change the fee like that retroactively? This sounds very weird. Ziplet is saying this is disgusting from a game preservation point of view. They've effectively added online DRM to validate installs of everything. It means archiving installers is also a no from that point. How is that going to work? Do they have the ability to remove an installation? Is it, as an end user, is it possible that you purchase the game, but you cannot install it because the developer is not paying the fee? This is an interesting question. What about old games? If the developer is not paying the fee anymore, but you purchase the game, maybe you cannot install it legally? Or do you have a warning? Or how is it going to work? And of course, for preservation, this might be this is a horrifying mess. Yeah, it's very messy. Wouldn't you add like a 0.2 to the price as a developer? It's actually a great question. One way to counter that as a developer would be to make your price higher. You could count that in the game. So in the end, the user would pay the price. So yeah, of course, this is also something that we see usually in different industries as a whole. There's a price increase somewhere. Usually the price will fall onto the end user at the end. You can add even more because someone who bought it can install it multiple times. Yeah, exactly. You can say that maybe on average, someone is actually going to install it 2 times or 1.5 times, so you actually add more. I don't think these changes are attracting people. It's just that Unity is so big that at some point it's very hard to go away from that, right? So you might be frightened. Also, maybe imagine that you've worked with Unity for years. It's very frightening, and it's also very difficult to move to a new engine. People have been using Unity for a while and they are scared, or it's going to cost them so much money to move away from Unity. Also, this is interesting. Yeah, Casper is saying, wow, they are excluding anyone who wants to make an app or a game which is free of traffic or analytics. This is interesting. Exactly. Because they have to track how many installs you have. You can't distribute something without the tracking or the analytics, probably. or maybe you have to pay something special. Maybe this is going to be an option. I don't know. I hope to hear the point of view of some of Unity, some developers using Unity. Some of them are probably going to run the calculations on how much it's going to cost them, and it's probably going to be super interesting. So we have to follow this, and hopefully we are going to have more information.